if you're not familiar with this analogy, it's the idea that when crabs are in a bucket, one might be kind of trying to crawl its way out, climb its way up the side of that bucket, and other crabs will actually grab its legs and pull it back down into the bucket rather than working together to try to get out of the
Mhm.
bucket. And unfortunately, some of those larger Facebook groups, even if there are well intentioned people there who are willing to support you, the, the volume of negativity and
Mm.
toxicity that lives there is just gross.
Welcome to the Christ Centered Stewardship Podcast with your hosts, Maria Casillas and Nino. Christ Centered Stewardship is a ministry of new money habits designed to equip believers to steward everything God has given them, including their time, talent, and treasure in ways that bring Him honor, glory, and praise. You can join our growing community on Facebook and submit your questions to podcast at newmoneyhabits.com. Now, to begin today's episode, here is Maria Casillas and Nino.
Well, hello again, Maria.
Hello, Nino.
Always a pleasure to sit down and chat with you.
You as well.
Thanks. So today I want to talk about one of our values about this idea of community supporting growth. We believe that it is important that people be plugged into a community, that you are able to find support for the things, the goals that you have and the things you're trying to accomplish. But not every community is created equal.
Agreed.
Yeah. So I want to help our listeners kind of discern, like, how do I, first of all, how do I get plugged in? And then how do I discern that I'm plugged in the right space, in the right community?
Okay. Well, I don't know about you, but I've been part of several different communities. Some of them have been online, some of them have been in person. I'm going to just hone in on one of the online ones first
Yeah,
because I think sometimes that's where people live these days. Although I do hope we can chat about some of the non-online ones because those
absolutely.
are I think that's where the real gold is. But some of those online ones, especially these days, I don't know, Nino, it feels like some of them you just have to be super careful with because people people say things online that they would never in a million years say to somebody's face. And I just think that when you have a community, it's important to realize that everybody is going to have an opinion in there. It might not serve you, though,
Mhm.
and that I think that's just one of the things that we need to know before we jump in. I mean, we can jump into communities, but it's if we realize that it is not going to be a healthy one for us, I actually think it's an important boundary to just bounce right out. Like, let not even stay in there. You don't not that everyone has to agree with everything you say or that you need to agree with everything in a community before you stay, but you recognize when something is kind of crossing the line into toxic versus just having differing opinions. So that's one thing I'd like to talk about if we could, just for a little bit. I don't see it a lot because I have drawn that boundary,
Mhm.
honestly, and I have pulled myself out of things that I'm not actually being served by. But I know you kind of go digging around a little bit just to kind of have your hand on the pulse of what's going on. So you might see a little bit more even than I do. What are some of your thoughts on some of that?
Yeah, I think the first thing I want to kind of mention is sometimes we find ourselves in a community thinking, okay, this is the community I need to be a part of. And to your point, maybe I'll hang around because I'm going to find the pocket of people.
Mm,
Right, like, there might be some toxic people here, but there's gonna also be some helpful people here, and I'll find those helpful ones, and I just think that the risk is not worth the reward. I think putting yourself inside of a group that is largely toxic, but maybe has a few, well-intentioned members. I think you're still running too much of a risk. And so to your point, I'd say, you know what, just bounce and find another one. Right.
mhm.
Or maybe reach out to individuals that if you saw that individual, connect with that individual one on one. And,
That's a great idea. Hmm.
yeah. So, like, if we were talking about Facebook as a platform for a moment, right? Lots of different Facebook groups, and maybe you find your one in a well-titled one that has tens, if not hundreds of thousands of members. So you figure this is the community. This is where I need to be. These are the like-minded people that I need to be around. But unfortunately, to your point, what I've seen, what I've experienced is you get into these groups and sometimes the naysayers, the ones who just want to bring everybody else down, are the loudest inside that community, which then makes it hard to even find and hear from the well-intentioned. I can't help but think of that analogy about crabs in a bucket. So if you're not familiar with this analogy, it's the idea that when crabs are in a bucket, one might be kind of trying to crawl its way out, climb its way up the side of that bucket, and other crabs will actually grab its legs and pull it back down into the bucket rather than working together to try to get out of the
Hmm.
bucket. And unfortunately, some of those larger Facebook groups, even if there are well intentioned people there who are willing to support you, the, the volume of negativity and
Mm.
toxicity that lives there is just gross.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think it's funny to see some of the groups where a large amount of the people just are know-it-alls. Like they know
Mm.
exactly what the moderators would say or exactly what, the name on the group would say. And so if somebody asks a question, I mean, we have like an Ask the Coaches segment here, and it would be kind of like throwing in an Ask the Coaches segment, or someone throws in a question and then the entire group answering on our behalf. And I think that's really interesting because A, you don't know exactly what we would think about that. But B, some people will say it with such conviction that they're like, oh yeah, totally, this is exactly what you should do. This is the way, it's the only way. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And unless we're talking about the truth with capital T, it's like there are some things that probably can be seen in different ways. And so it's like, pipe down a little bit there, Chachi. Like we
Yeah.
can do this. Like, let's think through this a little bit. But because they're, like I said earlier, they're willing to say things that they would not say in person, because there's like an emboldenment that happens when we are just using our typing out. People can think through what are they actually trying to say. They're not worried about what the person who they're talking to, what their facial expressions are, what their emotional reaction will be. None of that comes into their thought process when they're typing things out. And so they'll say things that are sometimes just downright mean spirited, I think. And so we want to make sure that we're not just jumping into all of those communities. And not only because it could be mean, but the advice itself, while there are probably some really good threads of truth in that advice, it it's not it's not so solid because it's riddled with all of this other yuck.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's why sometimes a smaller, more intimate group makes a lot more sense, right? Where maybe you're closer to the actual administrators and moderators of that group. When a group gets so large, it becomes um, kind of self-sustaining, right? The
Mhm.
moderators and the admins are not the ones necessarily engaging in every post, certainly not in every post, but they're very rarely engaging. Versus you find a smaller, little more intimate group, and you might actually see that the people who are there, you actually get to know them better. You get to know um, kind of how they think and how they feel. I wanted to also address real quick, as you said, unless we're talking about like the truth, but you also said that doesn't just because you're dealing in the truth doesn't mean that there's one solid way to apply that. For example, here's the example. We know the truth is love your neighbor. Right? That we are called to love our neighbors. We're even called to pray for our enemies. That it goes that far, right? When the person who approached Jesus asked, who is my neighbor? He gave the parable of the Good Samaritan and who was the neighbor in this situation. So we know that the truth is, I need to love my neighbor. The application of that truth shows up in different ways. right? It's not the same every single time. There's tough love. There's a time to set very healthy boundaries that say this is the best way for me to love you. Is I have to set this boundary. And then there's other times when we love with what seems to be like an endless compassion. So the application of those truths, um, I think really take us being intentional in conversation to kind of figure out some of the nuance. And I'll be the first to admit, I'm a dude. So
Yeah.
I just want to fix things, right? When somebody's all like, this is the problem I have, I'm like, here's the solution. So I know I have to take my own advice here and sometimes slow down and engage and learn more of like the nuance of the situation to help support somebody in, hey, this might be the best way to, or a good way to address that.
Mm. Yeah, that last part I think is really important. Understanding the nuance of a situation, which I think is actually a lot more difficult to do in an online setting because not only are you talking to a sentence rather than to a person, so you're not seeing any of the facial expressions and stuff, but unless somebody is online 24/7, which I know is the case for some, but unless someone's online 24/7, you can't really ask them a follow up question and expect a quick response because they've already moved on to the next thing in their life, and then they're not gonna come back and visit that maybe sometimes for a few days. So it is hard to have a dialogue, I think, online, and, so that's a really great point you made.
Yeah. And I'll even point it out to that end. We talked about maybe getting to know people in the group and then being able to message them one on one, right? So
Mhm.
again, if we were talking about Facebook as the platform, now maybe you take the conversation to Facebook Messenger and you're having a one on one exchange. Well, even in that situation, you're not having that exchange in real time. And so time goes by, different thoughts, different influences, different things happen, which may be rapidly changing the dynamic of the situation. And so it just gets sideways pretty quickly, which I think brings us to our point about, as you mentioned earlier, like getting plugged in to a real community where
Right.
you're actually engaging with real people in real time, I think is much, much better. Um, this can still happen with tools through the internet. You can find a group that meets maybe on Zoom, but now at least you're being able to fire up your video. You can see the other person, you can hear the tone and their inflection in the way that they're asking a question or the way that somebody's responding to a question. And now at least you're doing that much. But of course, in person would be ideal.
Yeah. So, if I may, I'm just going to talk about one of the communities that I have sought out, and it has nothing to do with anything financial. It's actually based on our homeschooling group, and I want to bring this to our audience because we've talked about how stewarding our gifts happens in every area of our lives, and it was about 5 years ago now, maybe, that I was being called 5 to 7 years ago. I was being called to start homeschooling my children, and I like to say that that was my Jonah Nineveh moment, like,
Mhm.
"Nope, I think you've got the wrong gal, I am not the person to do this," and so I resisted that for quite some time, and I think it was about 4 years ago that I finally said, "Okay, Lord, this if you're calling me, I'm the one who's going to do this." I am still not doing it well, I'm just throwing that out there, but I am a faithful servant, and I am showing up every day to do this, but I knew that I could not do this by myself. And so I sought out a community that was doing something that was in alignment with how I wanted to be able to teach my children, and that their foundational values were similar to mine, if not very much in alignment.
Mhm.
And so I thought, you know what, I'm gonna do this. I just kind of jumped in with that community. There are some people in there that I get along with very, very well. There are some people that there are differences, as there would be with any community, but I will tell you that it's been so great. It's been fruitful, and I've been grateful because the things that have come from it are more about growing me and my children way more than the academic part of it. And
Hmm.
I don't know that I would be able to do some of what I've done without having that support of the community because we wrestle with things together. It's not like they know all the answers and I'm there just to hear the answers. There are answers that I have that they didn't and vice versa. And then we have to wrestle through some of that stuff and learn together. And as we're doing that, we are growing together, not just as an individual, not just as a family, but as a community as well. And so I have not admittedly found that in person in some other areas of our lives. I mean, obviously, we have our church community, which is a wonderful thing to have. But when it comes to some of the online stuff, I haven't necessarily found an equivalent in person. So I just wanted to throw that out there and let you know that it's not necessarily going to be for every thing that we're trying to find community with. As long as you have some sort of community in person that you can kind of wrestle through some of these things with, I think that that's actually going to it's going to make things more fruitful for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think to your point, it's about first identifying what type of communities are you trying to get plugged into, right? So I know here in our area, we're in the West Valley of, outside of Phoenix. And so I know that there are groups that meet for the physical activities, whether that's hiking or some type of exercise in the park or whatever, right? So it's all like, oh, okay, there's community for that. If that's the kind of community I'm looking for, there's a way to get plugged in. We met through an entrepreneur outreach network. So we were looking for a community of
Mhm.
like-minded entrepreneurs who are out there doing the thing and looking for encouragement and support. And we were able to not only meet, but lo and behold, here we are. We're like, oh, there's an opportunity to collaborate and work together and do things in tandem and get better results together. And so, to your point, I mean, you have to kind of know what you're looking for, and then where can I find that? Where can I find it? And where can I find it that it's going to be fruitful and it's going to feed uh, me and encourage me in the right ways? It makes me think of a teaching that actually the church I attend just went over this weekend, and that is if you think about the relationships between Paul, Timothy, and Titus. So Paul is pouring into Timothy, Timothy is pouring into Titus, and then there's also Silas, and he's probably kind of on the plane with Timothy, and so the question becomes, who do I have pouring into me? Who am I pouring into? And who am I doing life together with in these areas? And so I think that's just a really good way to frame it for
Yeah.
our listeners to say, who's pouring into you? Who are you pouring into? And who are you learning a side of um, when it comes to whatever it is, whether it's physical health, it's financial wellness, whatever it might be. But who's pouring into you and who are you pouring into?
Yeah, that's a great frame.
Yeah. Well, I think that kind of takes us to our question for our Ask the Coaches segment because we have Jennifer in one of our groups who posted that she's kind of dealing with something, and I figured, hey, let's see if we can't apply some of what we were talking about today, in which that when we're dealing with the truth, there's a single truth, but then how you apply that truth can differ. So Jennifer had posted that um, she had her sister come by recently, and her sister is a source of stress and kind of a trigger for her. And so, with that stress, Jennifer didn't execute on some plans that she had. Instead, she called an audible and she did some other things. And now she's feeling guilty about the other things that she was doing because she was triggered by her sister. So the premise here is a person, specifically a family member, is triggering. The real question is, how can I best handle stress from a triggering family member?
Mm, that's a really loaded question.
where there's a whole lot of nuance that we don't know. I'll just put
That's
that out
right.
there.
That is right. So take all of this with a grain of salt because we don't know the
Mm,
nuance. But I think one thing is to just acknowledge that Jennifer recognized that there is this trigger. So that's actually an important thing. I think a lot of times when we especially think about family, we're like, family comes first and we need to make sure that, we do all of the things with and for them. And it is okay to recognize that they can create some of that stress in our lives for us. And so I just want to give her kudos for recognizing that. I will also say, that while we're not sharing what it was that she did or didn't do in this case, I think that that's actually an important piece for not our listeners to know any of that, but just to know that she recognizes an event that activated something else. So in order to do this, you're like, okay, here was my plan and I did not do that plan, and I am recognizing that the activating event was this thing over here, and it happens to be my sister. So in this case, though, I will say that sometimes it's easy to point blame, and I'm not saying she's doing this, but it's easy to assign explanation or reason to something and it then takes it off of us.
mm,
And so I'm not saying that the sister's not a stress point. I'm not saying that, that this isn't all real. But I am saying it just as a human being, sometimes it's easier to assign that than to own it ourselves. So whatever the thing was that she didn't do that she had set out to do, is it truly just because of that, or were there a whole myriad of circumstances around her that then led to her lack of doing this? And then, oh, well, how can I explain that away? Oh, it must be my sister. So
yeah.
I just want to just throw that out there because I think sometimes we can fall into that trap.
Yeah, I think to your point, what's really great is that Jennifer's is identifying that there was an issue and that she is then saying, "Hey, I know what the trigger is, but now she has to take ownership for how
Mhm.
she responds when
Yep.
she's triggered."
Yeah.
She can't just be like, "Oh, my sister's a trigger, and so now everything that I do after that is is yeah, I'm just the victim and I'm a victim of my circumstances, really, right? Like, so my
Mhm.
sister came over, I got stressed, I did what I did, and so it's okay because I was triggered." No, I, I'll take this personal. So I, a number of years ago, really struggled with some anger issues to the point that I was a version of myself I did not like when my anger was triggered. Well, it took some counseling to kind of figure out that that was even really happening. Like, I knew I was getting angry, and my outbursts of anger included a lot of yelling and maybe like pounding, right? Like just loud noises, right? So never physically violent with like my wife or my children, but just like I'd pound on something and I'd be really mad and I'd yell and I would curse. And what was really interesting about this is in my mind, I'd be like, "Nino, calm down." Like and so I can only explain that as like the Holy Spirit was trying to like gently like,
Mm.
it's not like why are we like this, right? And every time I was hearing like calm down and like everything's okay, it would actually just make me worse. I would actually curse more, yell more. And afterwards, I'd be sitting thinking like, what in the world is going on? So through counseling, I kind of figured out what my triggers were. So from a very young age, I have a trigger of not being heard. So I won't get into all the details, but I'll share one significant one. When I was 9, my parents split and they were going through the divorce and who was going to get custody. The judge asked me and my younger brother, "Who would you like to live with?" We both said dad. He gave mom custody. talk about not being heard, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So through counseling, I kind of figured like, oh, I must be holding on to some resentment there. But you pile on other times I feel like I was unheard. And so whenever I feel unheard, that's a trigger for me. So now that I know that, I can communicate it. I've been able to communicate to my family, I feel triggered or I get triggered when I feel unheard. Now, does that take any responsibility off of me? No, it actually kind of increases my responsibility. Now that I know that, I have to navigate that. I have to be able to communicate in a way that's not angry to say, family, right now I'm feeling unheard and I'm getting angry. It's still on
Mhm.
me, right? Like I can communicate that, but it's still on me. Like, am I going to allow that fuse to blow? Or am I going to manage this activating event that, okay, I've been triggered, I'm feeling unheard, I know what emotions I feel. I feel angry, and so I know how that anger manifests itself. And what am I going to do next? And here we are. This was all in like 2020 that this kind of unfolded. Here we are, 6 years later, and I'm happy to report that while I'm not free of anger all the time, and I never get angry, it is few and far between. And even when I do get angry, it's even more rare that there's yelling and even more rare that there's cursing.
Mhm.
Praise the Lord.
Mhm. Amen to that. Yeah, and to Jennifer's credit, she does go on to say that she has other plans on what to do, how
Yep.
to handle a situation as it comes out. So I don't think that this is a case where she's just placing blame and not being willing to take on some of that. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Also, just
Yeah.
wanted to throw that at the end so that Jennifer, if she's listening, does not think
Oh, yeah.
that we're like,
Yeah.
you gotta take responsibility, Jen.
Yeah.
So yeah, that actually is a really good example that you were able to share, and kudos to you for being able to take that and actually make that change, and it's obviously having a really great impact on your family and your own life, and that's beautiful.
I appreciate that. Yeah. And to that point, I picked Jennifer's post because she seems like willing to like hear, like, hey, you've already taken a couple of steps towards like owning it, right? Like, and
Yeah,
how do I manage that, right? And
yeah.
so I think that's just the part that I wanted to kind of share my own personal testimony is like, hey, as you're taking more and more responsibility, it does become about communicating. And
Mhm,
sometimes it's really hard to communicate with loved ones,
mhm,
um, that they are triggering you in a certain way. um, I'll give another quick story where uh, the family and I were visiting extended family in New York, and we were making plans to go someplace one of the days. And my sister was like, "Hey, can I come?" I was like, "You are always welcome to join us as long as."
mhm.
Ooh, the as long as did not go over well.
Mhm,
Um, I had to address behavior that I had witnessed in the past, and I didn't make a big deal out of it. I was just like, "Hey, as long as you are not rushing us through the experience and blah 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 blah." And she's like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "Well, in past, these things have happened, right?" And and it was uncomfortable, but I had to communicate. And through that communication, we came to an agreement of like whether or not she was going to come based on setting reasonable, healthy boundaries.
mhm.
Right.
Mhm. And I do think that it is extra difficult to do that when it comes to family, and I think it's because we are going to be said family until we die. So and so it's like if you have a little spat with somebody online that is not affecting your life and you never have to see that person again, the the risk is just very low in that case, unless you're worried about, how something affects you emotionally. But if you're not married to the idea of that person. It's like, whatever, I can do without them. When it comes to family, you can still draw a boundary and end up not having that person in your life. I understand that that's a case, but that hurts a little bit more because
Hmm.
there's more of a tie there, and I think we're kind of meant to be in community. I really do believe that God did not create us to be just isolated individuals. I mean, even if you look at the Trinity, like
Right.
God is three persons in one, and it's like there's community there, and love it requires more than one. And so I think it's just something that we need to remember when it comes to how we react to certain things, certain situations. With the whole thing with Jennifer, I do think, because we want to answer her question, she's doing a really good job of making plans already to
Hmm.
address the thing that is going to that triggered her this time. It's she's not getting rid of her sister. In this case, she wants to have things available to her in order to keep her from going out and buying something. That's what some of this is about, just so you all know. Um, but she didn't want to go and buy something, and because it was not something that she had planned for, and then she's really just beating herself up because she didn't stick to her plan. That's Would you say that's the
Yeah,
basis
the
of
crux of it. I
that?
mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think we're trying to withhold information for any particular reason other than to like
Yeah.
make it general, like a general application of like, how do I handle stress from a triggering family member? It
Right.
is,
Right.
well, there is some specificity to Jennifer's situation that it's all like, well, in your situation, you are taking steps. I think the greater answer to for anybody who's dealing with stress from a family member is one, recognize what that is. Two, start to be able to communicate with your family. Because in Jennifer's case, she's taking steps toward not falling into the same trap
Mhm.
around that specific. But if her sister is continuing to be a source of stress and a trigger, at what point does she sit down with her sister and start to have really tough conversations, but really important conversations
Yeah.
about, hey, there are these things that are happening. There is a dynamic in our relationship that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. Yep, and that's the tough conversation.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Well, I think that takes us to the challenge for the week. And the challenge for this week is going to be something we mentioned earlier, and I'm going to bring it back to the forefront. I want everybody to take a few moments, to, sit down, and I want you to think about in the area of whatever your greatest need is right now or your greatest desire. So, whether this is you're looking for physical health in the new year, whether you're looking to regain control of your finances in the new year, or something else, I want you to answer these questions. Reflect on who is pouring into you. So, who is your pull? Who's pouring into you in that way? Then I want you to reflect and answer the question, who are you pouring into in that area? So who's your Titus? And then who's your Silas? Who are you learning with? So who's pouring into you? Who are you pouring into? And who are you learning with?
Sounds like a great challenge. Challenge accepted.
Awesome.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Christ Centered Stewardship Podcast. Follow us on your favorite social media platform for more encouragement and support. And until next time, may the Lord keep you in perfect peace as you set your sight on Jesus.